Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world that smells a little fermented. You're standing in the middle of a medieval town square, mud clinging to your shoes, the air thick with wood smoke, livestock, and something suspiciously sour. You pause to breathe, then immediately regret it. Someone just dumped a chamber pot from a second-story window, and that splash you just heard? Yeah, that was not rain. You look around. Market stalls are stacked high with onions, eels, and wheels of cheese, so ripe they seem to be plotting their own escape. Somewhere nearby, a pig squeals as it's led to a not-so-happy ending, and a group of barefoot kids chase each other through puddles of who knows what. Welcome to your first 5 minutes in medieval Europe. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while we're getting into it, post your location and local time down in the comments. I always love seeing where and when everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You inch toward the edge of the square, hoping for a little peace. No luck. A street performer is hammering away at what might be a fiddle or a tortured cat in disguise. The baker's apprentice yells something crude at a fishmonger. A priest marches by, swinging incense with all the enthusiasm of a man who's nose-blind from decades of sin. There's no plumbing, no soap, and no sense of personal space. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick, mostly from rain, but also from blood, beer, and other biological surprises. You make the mistake of leaning against a wall. It squelches. You jump back. Lesson 1. Nothing here is clean. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person was actually dirty by the standards of their own time, or simply doing their best with limited tools. But there's no debating your senses right now. They're staging a rebellion. Suddenly, a man stumbles out of a tavern and promptly relieves himself into a corner just a few feet from your boot. You blink. He winks, then disappears back inside. Normal behavior, apparently. You spot what looks like a horse-drawn cart with an odd, lumpy load. Upon closer inspection, it's a pile of dead animals and refuse, slowly steaming. That cart's job: carry waste to the dumping grounds, usually outside city walls, but often just wherever. You press on, weaving through narrow alleys. Laundry hangs overhead like colorful flags of surrender. You duck a dripping sock. Someone tosses stale bread to the ground, followed instantly by a flock of aggressive geese that you learn, quickly, have no fear of man. At one point, you nearly trip over a chicken. It squawks indignantly and vanishes beneath a cart. You, meanwhile, are trying to remember when your tetanus shot was. Of course, not everything is filth and chaos. There's charm here too, hidden beneath the grime. Cobblestone curves tell stories. Hand-carved doors are worn smooth by centuries of knocking. A flower seller hums softly as she ties her bouquets with string, the petals offering rare pockets of beauty in the brown-gray world around you. Still, your nose hasn't adjusted. Every breath is a new adventure: garlic, manure, fish, smoke, and something else. You don't even want to know. Some towns tried to enforce basic sanitation rules. In London, for example, it was technically illegal to dump waste in the street. But enforcement was, let's say, casual at best. You wander into a small courtyard, hoping for silence. Instead, you find a man lecturing a group of townsfolk on the dangers of sin. He waves a leather-bound book in one hand and a dried pig's bladder in the other. Apparently, the bladder represents the soul. You're not sure how, but everyone claps anyway. It's overwhelming. The noise, the smells, the general sense that everything is alive, including the buildings, which groan in the wind like tired old men. And you've only been here for 20 minutes. Let that sink in. You reach a well in the center of the square, where people are lined up to draw water. A girl in a headscarf warns you not to drink too deeply. It might have been blessed by the tanner. You don't ask what that means, but you definitely notice the leathery smell wafting from her bucket. By now, your shoes are soaked, your stomach is growling, and your dignity is hanging by a thread. And this is just your introduction. You haven't even tried the food yet. But before we get to that, take a breath, carefully, and take in your surroundings once more. Because whether or not you last the full day here, you're definitely not forgetting this place. You're hungry now, but not in the fun, what's for lunch kind of way. It's more like a dull ache setting in, creeping up your ribs and whispering something desperate. So you wander back toward the market square, this time with food in mind. You're hoping for something warm, something vaguely recognizable, maybe something with cheese. Dream on. Your first option is a wooden tray held by a wrinkled man who smells like smoke and onions. On it, he displays 4 blackened pies, their crusts cracked like desert soil. One has a pigeon foot poking out. Literally. You move on. Next, a brewer's apprentice offers you a mug of something brown and foamy. Breakfast ale, he says proudly. It's thick, room temperature, and tastes like the barrel it came from, which may have once held pickled herring. You politely gag into your sleeve. But then, a glimmer of hope. A plump woman is selling fresh bread. You hurry over. The loaf she hands you is round, dusted with coarse flour, and weighs roughly as much as a cannonball. You take a bite. It does not yield. This bread is not soft. This bread is not gentle. This bread is the enemy. You gnaw at it anyway, breaking down its fortress-like crust with your molars, which, spoiler alert, you're going to regret in Section 4. Meanwhile, a child next to you crunches a raw onion like it's an apple and stares at you like you're the weirdo. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants really ate as poorly as we assume. Sure, meat was rare, but they had access to grains, legumes, root vegetables, and the occasional foraged berry. But when the harvest was bad, which it often was less farm to table and more scrape the mold off and hope for the best. A baker might use sawdust or ground beans to stretch flour. A cheesemonger might hide worms under a layer of spice. And spoiled meat. Just boil it longer. Problem solved. You finally settle on a bowl of pottage. Kind of a medieval stew. Kind of a sad puddle. It's warm, at least. Made from barley, turnips, leeks, and something green you don't recognize. It tastes like damp leaves, but it fills the space. You try to sit on a bench, but it's already occupied by a goose. The goose hisses. You yield. As you stand awkwardly near a dung cart, chewing your 8th mouthful of wet porridge, a friar sidles up beside you and offers a prayer for your digestion. You nod, unsure whether to thank him or run. The morning continues. You spot a man selling cheesecakes, but they turn out to be little more than curdled milk shaped into patties and baked until rubbery. One is flavored with rosewater. You take a bite, and your taste buds immediately file a complaint with upper management. And yet, there's something comforting in the simplicity of it all. No preservatives, no packaging, no sugar highs followed by existential dread. Just, rot. You pass a sausage stand. The vendor is red-faced and jovial, turning links over a wood fire. The smell is intoxicating. You buy one. It's spicy, greasy, glorious. You feel hope for the first time all day, until the vendor slaps you on the back and says, "Best rat meat in the Shire." He laughs. You don't. Historians still argue whether rat meat was truly consumed by the lower classes or if it's just a grim exaggeration. But the record shows that people got creative: hedgehogs, badgers, songbirds, even roasted swan if you were wealthy enough. Waste not, want not, right? You start to feel queasy. That could be the rat, or the ale, or the realization that this is your normal now. You lean against a cart, trying to breathe through your mouth and ignore the bucket of pickled eels nearby. A dog sniffs your shoes. You pretend not to notice. Across the square, you see someone selling honey cakes. You rush over, only to learn they're reserved for church feast days. That's in 3 weeks. You cry a little. Quietly. A group of children are playing with pig bladders inflated like balloons. One explodes near your ear. You jump and drop your bread. A rooster eats it. The children cheer. This is your breakfast. This is your morning. And if you're wondering about coffee, sorry, that doesn't reach Europe for a few hundred more years. So unless you want to chew on raw chicory root or sip boiled dandelion water, you're stuck with ale. Or mead, if you're lucky. Or water, if you enjoy gambling with dysentery. But hey, at least you're full now. Mostly. You're also sticky, a little lightheaded, and very aware that your stomach is about to go on a journey all its own. Better start walking. Maybe the act of moving will settle things, or maybe it'll make them worse. You won't know until it's too late. You've managed to feed yourself, barely, and now it's time to figure out how to dress like a local. Because nothing screams easy target like walking around in your 21st century hoodie and sneakers. Unfortunately, medieval fashion is less runway and more run away before the fleas get you. You're pointed toward a local clothier, really just an old woman with a basket of rough spun wool and a pair of shears. She eyes you, clucks her tongue, and mutters something about your odd-shaped limbs. Then she tosses you a tunic made from something that might have once been brown. It smells like damp hay and goat. You put it on anyway. The fabric itches immediately. Not in the light, ooh, that's a little scratchy way, but in the full body, did I just roll in poison ivy sort of way. Underneath, there's no underwear. Why? Because you haven't earned it yet. Or maybe because it hasn't been invented in a way you'd recognize. Either way, you're free-balling it in linen. Good luck. As you tie a crude belt around your waist, someone hands you shoes, if you can call them that. They're more like leather socks with holes. You slip them on and instantly feel every pebble, twig, and regrettable decision beneath your feet. Supportive arch design? Not in this millennium. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really had such miserable clothing, or whether we just exaggerate it in hindsight. But based on what you're wearing, it's hard to imagine anything worse without going fully nude. Then comes the headgear. A floppy woolen cap, somewhere between sad wizard and overcooked pastry. It's supposed to keep the lice in, or out. Honestly, no one knows. But you're wearing it now, and the lice don't seem discouraged. You hear a familiar scritch in your ear. That's not the wind. That's movement. You try not to panic. Don't worry, someone says casually. The fleas get everyone. Apparently, there's a sort of unspoken rule here. If your clothes don't smell like cabbage, and your hair isn't matted to your scalp, you're either a noble or a witch. Neither is a good option for staying alive. You glance at the townspeople around you. Their clothes are patched, stained, and oddly layered. That's because outer garments double as blankets, and raincoats, and napkins. Laundry day? A fantasy. Most people just beat their clothes against rocks until the dirt gives up. A blacksmith walks by in soot-covered trousers and no shirt. His chest hair glistens with sweat and metal shavings. A group of children scatter around his legs, holding what look like rabbit skins. One of them is barefoot in the mud, grinning like it's Christmas. You try walking in your new outfit, but the tunic keeps riding up, and the shoes are already rubbing raw patches on your heels. You shuffle like a scarecrow learning ballet. The townspeople watch, amused. One woman kindly suggests you rub pig fat on your thighs to prevent chafing. You decline. She shrugs and slathers her own legs, smiling in greasy satisfaction. You step into the shadow of the local mill, hoping for a breeze. Instead, you're greeted with a cloud of flour and coughing peasants. One of them wears a cloak made entirely of old potato sacks. He says it's fashionable. You're not going to argue. Historians still debate whether clothing in the medieval period was mostly functional or had more nuanced social signals than we understand. Color and fabric did play a role. Blue was expensive, green more common, red suspiciously associated with sin. But for you, right now, every color just looks like dirt. You overhear a woman discussing garlic garlands worn not for cooking, but for repelling demons and, possibly, suitors. You make a mental note to try that later. As the sun climbs higher, your woolen outfit becomes a personal oven. Sweat trickles down your back, then immediately gets trapped by your linen underlayer. You smell like a compost heap inside a barn. A young boy runs up to you, points, and says, "You dressed funny." He's wearing nothing but a long shirt and a belt. You decide not to take fashion advice from someone with a smear of jam across their forehead and one shoe. Still, you wonder if he's right. Maybe you do look ridiculous. But then again, maybe everyone does. Maybe medieval life is one big scratchy costume party where the theme is, "I haven't bathed since Lent." You find a bench, sit down, and try to adjust your belt. It snaps. A passing woman offers a length of twine and a sympathetic nod. You tie it around your waist and pretend this was the plan all along. And just when you think you've reached peak discomfort, a man walks by in full armor. Shiny, immaculate, glorious. You stare. He lifts his visor and winks. You realize he's not a knight. He's a performer for the visiting noble's feast. He's paid to look clean. It's a scam. You slump back on the bench, your wool clinging to you like a needy ex. This is your life now. Itchy, sweaty, and slowly being colonized by fabric-dwelling parasites. Still, you can't help but admire the ingenuity. Clothes here aren't about fashion, they're about survival. Warmth in winter, shade in summer, armor against lice. And when you're done with them, cut them into bandages, or shoe patches, or doll clothes, or rags to scrub your pot of turnip soup. Everything is reused. Everything has purpose, even if that purpose is mild suffering. Your outfit may be itchy, and your dignity threadbare. But what's really bothering you now is that dull, throbbing ache in your jaw. One of your molars has decided it's time to riot. At first, you think maybe it's from gnawing on that cannonball loaf of bread. But no, this pain feels older, deeper, like your tooth's been plotting revenge since the minute you stepped through time. You ask around for a healer. That's cute. There's no dentist here, no sterile chair, no gentle rinse, no little bib. Instead, you're directed to the barber surgeon, because in this world, the guy who gives you a trim is also the guy who slices open boils and performs amateur brain surgery. You find him under a faded red and white pole. Yes, that's where that symbol comes from, sharpening his instruments with a whetstone that's seen better days, and probably some blood. You approach with cautious optimism. He smiles, a wide, unsettling grin that reveals his own teeth, most of which have fled the scene long ago. "Toothache, is it?" he says, already reaching for something metal and horrifying. He doesn't ask about symptoms. He doesn't examine your mouth. He just says, "We'll need to pull it." Then adds with a wink, or maybe drill into the bone to let out the pressure. You laugh nervously. He doesn't. Historians still argue whether medieval surgery was truly as barbaric as popular myth suggests, or whether we've underestimated their practical skill. Either way, anesthesia as you know it doesn't exist yet. The best you can hope for is a stiff drink and someone to hold you down. He offers you a leather strap to bite on. You politely decline. He shrugs and hands you a wooden spoon. Then he takes out his tool of choice, a tooth key, which looks like a corkscrew mated with a torture device. You try to back away, but two burly men appear behind you. One holds your shoulders. The other whispers, "Try not to swallow your tooth." You sit. He twists. You scream. It's not heroic. The pain is blinding. There's a crunch, a pop, and the very real sensation that part of your skull just dislodged. Blood pours from your mouth. You try to stand. The barber surgeon pats your back and says, "Good as new," while holding your tooth up like a trophy. Then he throws it into a pile. A pile. You stumble away. Cotton. Okay. Linen. Stuffed in your mouth. Woozy and wondering whether you've made a huge mistake. Spoiler, you have. As you stagger down the street, someone hands you a poultice of herbs and says to press it to your cheek. It smells like mold and vinegar. You do it anyway. The burn is almost as bad as the extraction. Almost. You pass a woman selling tooth charms, little bones strung on twine, said to ward off pain. You buy 3. A local boy recommends you hold a frog in your mouth to cure the ache. You decline. He shrugs and hops away. You find a place to sit in the shade, breathing through your nose, wondering how anyone survived this. The answer? Many didn't. Tooth infections were no joke. An untreated abscess could kill you. Slowly. In a very swollen, very smelly way. Still, medieval people had their own remedies. Clove oil. Onion poultices. Rinses made from wine and salt. They even used burned mouse bones for tooth powder. Tasty. You try chewing on a clove someone offers you. It numbs your tongue slightly. Progress. And then there's trepanation. Not for teeth, thankfully, but still worth mentioning. You hear about it from a traveling monk who boasts of having once drilled into a man's skull to let the demons out. Apparently it worked. The man stopped talking. Forever. Historians still debate whether trepanation was used to treat head injuries, mental illness, or just a very aggressive form of ancient stress relief. The skulls we've found show signs of healing, meaning people survived the procedure. Somehow. You're not about to volunteer. Instead, you limp toward a fountain, hoping to rinse your mouth. The water is cloudy. You hesitate, then settle for swishing a bit of ale around your teeth. It stings. It also feels medievally appropriate. Someone passes by and offers you a dried fig. It sticks to the raw socket in your gum, and you nearly pass out. You resolve to eat nothing but soup from now on. You lie back in the grass and stare at the sky. Birds chirp overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a blacksmith hammers iron. Children shriek with joy or terror. It's hard to tell. Your face is swollen. Your mouth tastes like metal. And your shirt now has a faint bloodstain that, honestly, matches the aesthetic. This is your reality now. No Novocaine, no X-rays, just pain, prayers, and a guy with rusty tools and too much confidence. And the worst part? Tomorrow you'll probably need to go back for the other tooth. You decide to get out of town for a while, clear your head, stretch your legs, and maybe escape the lingering smell of onion stew and singed hair. So you ask for directions to the next village. A kind old man points vaguely toward the horizon and says, "Follow the cart ruts and pray." Great. That inspires confidence. You set off on foot, chewing softly on the inside of your cheek to avoid disturbing the gaping hole where your molar used to live. The road, if you can call it that, is a narrow path of mud, rocks, and horse manure. It winds between fields of barley and flax, past crooked fences and the occasional stone shrine that might be for a saint or a scarecrow. Hard to tell. About 20 minutes in, you've already twisted your ankle twice and been startled by what may have been a feral goat with trust issues. You soldier on. There are no road signs, no maps, no GPS lady cheerfully telling you to turn left in 400 feet. Just birdsong, wind, and your inner voice quietly screaming. Historians still argue whether medieval travel was actually as perilous as legends suggest. But for the average peasant like yourself, going even a few miles meant risking wolves, outlaws, and the very real possibility of just getting hopelessly, fatally lost. You pass a man carrying a large sack and ask if you're going the right way. He looks you over, grunts, and says, "Aye, if your soul's clean," then disappears into the woods. You decide not to follow. The forest you enter is ancient, dense, and dim. Shafts of light break through the canopy in long, narrow beams. It's beautiful, in a haunting, vaguely cursed kind of way. Birds chirp, and every so often you hear a rustle in the underbrush that makes you grip your stick tighter. Yes, you picked up a stick. For protection. It's not very convincing. After a while, the trail fades. You find yourself pushing through brambles, your wool tunic snagging on thorns. You pause, sweating, and then hear it, a low growl. You freeze. It could be a dog, bear, or more likely, a wolf. You slowly back away, only to step on a twig that snaps like a cannon shot. The growl gets louder. You run. You tear through the woods, ducking branches and jumping over logs, heart pounding like a medieval drum solo. At one point, you trip and land face first in a patch of mushrooms. You hope they're not poisonous. You don't have the time to Google it. Eventually, you tumble out into a meadow, wheezing. No wolves, no brigands. Just you, covered in burrs, your sock shoes squelching, your dignity somewhere back near that suspicious shrine. You lie on the grass for a moment and try to appreciate the scenery. The sky is blue. The breeze is nice. And then you hear distant shouting. A group of men on horseback appears, wearing mismatched armor and carrying clubs. You panic, but they ignore you completely, riding past in pursuit of someone else. You've just seen a local feud in action. Land disputes, stolen pigs, unpaid dowries, almost anything could trigger a fight in rural communities. Historians still debate how lawless the countryside really was. Some say violence was rare outside wars and raids. Others claim villages operated under their own rough codes, where justice was swift, improvised, and deeply personal. You finally spot a cottage in the distance. Smoke curls from its chimney, and the smell of something roasting wafts your way. You limp toward it, dreaming of soup and safety. As you approach, an old woman appears in the doorway. She eyes you like she's assessing whether you're edible. Then she cackles and waves you inside. You're too tired to resist. Inside, the air is thick with herbs and damp firewood. The walls are lined with jars, some filled with pickled roots, others with things that definitely have eyes. A cat hisses at you from a shelf. She feeds you something hot and suspiciously chewy. You don't ask questions, you're just grateful. She tells you stories of wandering ghosts, enchanted trees, and knights who turned into toads. You nod politely, wondering how much of this is local legend and how much is genuine trauma. Before you leave, she hands you a pouch of dried leaves. "For the tooth," she says. You thank her. She smiles without blinking. You leave quickly. The path back is easier now, somehow. Maybe because you're used to the mud. Maybe because you no longer fear death. Either way, the town feels almost welcoming when you return, like an old pair of itchy pants you've finally stopped fighting. You've survived the not-so-great outdoors, and you've learned a valuable lesson. In medieval times, going for a walk was basically extreme survival with bonus blisters. Back in town, covered in mud, sweat, and a creeping suspicion that the dried leaves the old woman gave you were just crushed weeds, you're told to go bathe. Finally, you think. A bath. Warm water. Steam. Maybe a clean cloth. Oh, sweet, naive time traveler. There are no private bathrooms here. No bathtubs with clawed feet and lavender salts. What you get is the communal bathhouse, a large, steamy wooden building that smells like boiled cabbage, damp moss, and a whiff of someone's unwashed regrets. You walk in and are immediately hit by a wall of heat and humidity. Men and women alike sit in big, shallow tubs, naked, laughing, sweating. It's like a spa, but with way fewer cucumbers and way more back hair. A man hands you a rough linen cloth and points to a bucket. You take it and wander toward an empty tub, hoping to find some kind of soap. Instead, there's a bowl of ashes and lard. Soap, apparently. You dip a toe in. The water is warm. Suspiciously so. It's cloudy and smells faintly of feet and fennel. You try not to think about how many bodies have marinated in it before you. You also try not to scream when something brushes your thigh under the water. Hopefully that was a plant. Or a toe. Preferably yours. You settle in, clutching your linen like a security blanket, as a large, cheerful man next to you strikes up conversation. He wants to talk about sheep, loudly, while scrubbing his armpits. Historians still argue whether medieval bathhouses were hubs of hygiene or hubs of other activities. Some were religiously motivated, especially in Islamic Spain, where cleanliness was part of ritual. Others became notorious for less sacred behaviors. This one seems to fall into the category of hot gossip and hotter water. Someone begins to sing. Another person burps. You are splashed accidentally, you hope, and realize that the bathwater now has more flavor than you'd like. Still, there's something oddly soothing about the whole scene. Everyone's relaxed. No one cares how they look. And it's the cleanest you've felt since arriving. A woman offers to scrub your back with a bundle of twigs. You politely decline. She does it anyway. You're exfoliated within an inch of your life. Suddenly, a monk bursts into the bathhouse, waving a stick and shouting about sin. Everyone groans. Apparently this happens often. You duck lower into the water, trying to avoid eye contact. The monk rants about temptation and body shame, then leaves in a huff when someone offers him a loofah. You rinse off with a cold bucket of water, standard bathhouse finale. It hits like a slap to the soul. You gasp, shiver, and feel the fleas abandoning ship like rats off a burning barge. Dried with a scratchy cloth and redressed in your still damp wool, you exit the bathhouse feeling cleaner, slightly traumatized, and strangely proud. You've bathed. In public. With strangers, and you live to tell the tale. Outside, the cool air feels sharp and glorious. Your skin tingles. You smell like mint and boiled onions. It's an upgrade. Of course, you'll be dirty again by morning. There's no deodorant, no antiperspirant, and certainly no Febreze. But for now, you're clean enough to blend in with the slightly less filthy townsfolk. You ask someone how often people bathe. The answer varies wildly. Some say once a week. Others, once a season. A few nobles bathe daily with rosewater and servants. Most peasants? When the bathhouse has room and their fleas have unionized. Historians still debate how often people really bathed, depending on class, geography, and era. In early medieval periods, bathing was seen as healthy. Later, during plague outbreaks, it was considered dangerous, believed to open the pores to disease. You spot a young couple walking arm in arm, both fret and still dripping slightly. They look blissful. You, meanwhile, are dripping too. But that's just residual bathhouse trauma and questionable lard soap. The bathhouse experience lingers on you, like a damp echo. You'll remember it every time your clothes itch, every time you smell boiled herbs, and every time you see a stranger too comfortable with communal nudity. As you walk away, someone shouts, "See you next month." You don't know whether they mean it kindly or as a threat. Clean-ish, and starting to feel like maybe you've earned a break, you decide to do what any respectable peasant might do after a long day of tooth loss and accidental nudity: hit the tavern. It's late afternoon, the sun hangs low and warm in the sky, and the smell of roasted something drifts down a narrow alley. Your feet follow it like they've got minds of their own, leading you to a lopsided wooden building with crooked shutters, a squeaky sign, and the faint sound of arguing inside. Welcome to the local tavern, or as it's sometimes called, the center of everything. You step inside and are immediately hit with the scent of spilled mead, damp wood, and feet. The place is dimly lit with smoky rushlights and tallow candles. Shadows dance across low wooden beams, and every surface, floor, wall, table, is covered in scratches, dents, or stains. Probably all three. There's no host, no wait list, no tiny beeper to tell you when your table's ready. You just find a space, sit down, and hope whoever was there last didn't die on the bench. A portly man with one eye and 3 teeth slams a mug in front of you. He grunts something that might be "hello" or "don't anger the cook." You respond with a nod and an awkward thumbs up. Wrong century. Doesn't matter. You sip the drink. It's strong, somewhere between cider, regret, and cleaning fluid. It burns all the way down but loosens your shoulders instantly. You glance around. There's a minstrel in the corner playing a lute with exactly 0 talent but full confidence. Every time he hits a note, a rat under the table flinches. You can relate. At the far side of the room, a group of farmers argues over whose goat produces the loudest bleat. A man in a fur-lined cloak slams down his cup and announces he's a bastard son of a baron. Nobody seems impressed. A woman tells a joke about a bishop and a badger that ends in raucous laughter. You don't get it, but you laugh anyway. You order food. At least, you think you do. The barmaid squints, then shouts something toward the back. Moments later, you're served a wooden bowl of something. It's brown, chunky, smells vaguely of cabbage and something once alive. You eat it. It's not the worst thing you've tasted today. A man sits beside you and asks if you want to play dice. You hesitate, remembering you have 0 coins. He leans in and whispers, "We're playing for socks." You agree instantly. You lose instantly. Historians still argue whether taverns were truly dens of vice or more like informal town halls. But in practice, they were the lifeblood of social interaction. Deals were struck, songs were sung, marriages arranged, grievances aired, and sometimes fists thrown. Speaking of fists, there's a scuffle at the next table. 2 men stand up, shout about cheating, and throw wooden mugs at each other. One misses and hits the lute player, who doesn't notice. He's too deep in his off-key solo. A 3rd man intervenes with a hearty laugh and an enormous roasted turnip. He bonks one of them on the head. Peace is restored. You ask about entertainment, and someone directs your attention to the dancing bear. You decline, then realize they were joking. Probably. Someone proposes a toast. Everyone stands. You follow suit. The toast is shouted in Latin, and you raise your mug with confidence. It doesn't matter that you don't know what it means. Half the room doesn't either. The sentiment is clear. We're alive, we're together, and the mead is flowing. You smile. For a moment you forget about your toothache, your flea-bitten tunic, your earlier brush with wolves. You're just another warm body in a place where warmth is rare. Then someone vomits on the floor, and you're snapped back to reality. The barmaid throws a rag over it. No one moves. The music continues. The drink keeps flowing. Historians still debate how often taverns were visited by peasants versus the slightly better-off yeomen and merchants. But tonight, you see people of every kind here. Farmhands, cobblers, beggars, even a minor noble who insists his cloak is made from unicorn wool. It's not. By the end of the evening, your belly is full-ish, your limbs are loose, and your mood is oddly buoyant. Maybe it's the fermented mystery beverage. Maybe it's the shared laughter of strangers. Maybe it's the way the candlelight softens everyone's features, even the guy with the lazy eye and collection of rat pelts. You stumble outside into the cool night air. The stars above you are painfully bright, unspoiled by streetlights or pollution. You breathe in smoke, hay, wet dog, and exhale slowly. You made it through your first tavern experience without getting stabbed or drafted into a war. That's something. Still, as you wobble your way toward wherever you're sleeping tonight, one thing becomes clear. This isn't the medieval fantasy from movies and fairy tales. It's messier, smellier, realer, and, strangely, kind of beautiful. After the chaos, stench, and semi-sentient stew of the tavern, all you want is sleep. Real, deep, unconscious, horizontal sleep. You imagine a soft mattress, a woolen blanket, maybe even a pillow that doesn't smell like goat. But this is medieval Europe. And in medieval Europe, bed is a generous concept. You're shown to a small wooden house owned by a distant cousin of someone you met at the bathhouse. Or was it the tavern? Doesn't matter. You're just thankful to be off the street and not curled up next to a pig in an alley, though, to be fair, that's still on the table. The room is small, dark and warm with body heat. You open the door and are immediately greeted by the sound of breathing. Lots of breathing. Heavy, wheezy, gurgly breathing. You've walked into a sleeping chamber. The bed is a pile of straw stuffed into a wooden frame, covered with a linen sheet that was probably white at some point in the 11th century. 6 people are already lying in it. You are number 7. You squeeze yourself between a sweaty teen and an older woman with a snore like thunder. The mattress crunches ominously beneath you. You don't want to know what's in it. You close your eyes and instantly regret it. Something moves near your ankle. It's small, fast, and unbothered by your presence. Fleas? Probably. Mice? Also likely. You try not to scream. Historians still argue whether bed sharing was more about necessity or social bonding. In truth, it was both. Beds were expensive. Homes were small. Body heat was valuable. If you wanted to survive a medieval winter, you slept in a people pile. Someone farts. A child mumbles in their sleep and elbows you in the ribs. You turn over, only to find yourself face to face with a dog that definitely wasn't there before. Its breath smells like fish and friendship. It licks your nose. You accept it. You're too tired to object. You stare at the rafters. Spiderwebs shimmer in the candlelight. The room smells of straw, sweat, and foot. Someone coughs, and for a moment you panic. Plague? Tuberculosis? Just a dry throat? The line is thin. You try counting sheep, Then you realize sheep are louder in real life than they are in bedtime stories. Also, you're pretty sure you saw one walk past the window. Suddenly, a neighbor begins to mutter. You think it's Latin, or a curse, or possibly just someone dreaming of cabbage. Either way, it's unsettling. Your back itches, your elbow hurts, your head rests on a burlap sack filled with bird feathers and regret. The person next to you snores rhythmically. It's almost soothing. Almost. You hear a creak from the attic above. You freeze. Is it a ghost? A rat? A ghost rat. Then the roof moans in the wind. Rain starts. Not a soft, romantic drizzle, but a loud, urgent thumping. The leak is immediate. Water lands directly on your forehead. You shift your position, twisting like a medieval game of Twister, and find a dry spot between two sets of feet. You breathe through your mouth. You pray. Historians still debate how common private bedrooms were among peasants. Most likely, not common at all. A single room would serve as kitchen, dining hall, nursery, and bedroom. Everyone slept together, adults, children, animals, sometimes strangers. You try to focus on the positives. You're indoors. You're technically horizontal, and no one's tried to rob you in the last 10 minutes. Then the child next to you sits bolt upright and whispers, "The worms are in the apples." You don't sleep after that. Instead, you drift in and out of a state best described as paranoid dozing. You dream of straw that bites and walls that breathe. You wake up sweating, only to find it's someone else's sweat. You roll over and fall partially off the bed. A chicken pecks your foot. You accept this as penance. At one point, someone lights a candle and checks your pulse. You ask what they're doing. "Just making sure you're not dead," they whisper. Then they tuck you in. You sigh. Deeply. The candlelight flickers. The room is alive with snoring and muttering and rustling. It's like sleeping inside a compost heap that's learned to speak. Still, you can't help but admire the resilience. People lived like this for centuries. Every night. And they woke up. They laughed. They worked. They made more people. You wonder if you'll ever sleep again, or if this is just your life now, an eternal loop of flea-bitten insomnia and communal breathing. But eventually, somehow, your eyelids grow heavy. The snoring fades. The dog settles. The rain softens, and you drift into a sleep so deep you dream you're in a bed made of clouds, until the rooster crows, loudly. At 3 a.m. Welcome to medieval mornings. You wake up disoriented, half drenched in drool, some of it yours, with a stiff neck and a vague recollection of being spooned by someone who called you Gertrude in their sleep. The rooster crows again, just in case you forgot where, or when, you are. You sit up, bits of straw clinging to your tunic, and stretch your arms, immediately knocking over a clay cup that spills something unidentifiable. The smell confirms it wasn't water. You shuffle to the door, bleary-eyed and barefoot, stepping around the dog, the child, and the grandmother now snoring on her back with both hands in the air like she's praising the sunrise. Outside, the village is already awake. You'd think it was noon from the bustle, but no, it's just barely light. In medieval times, your day starts with the sun and ends with the stars. And if you oversleep, tough luck. No alarm clock, no snooze button, just a stern knock on the door and a very judgmental neighbor. You wander toward the town square in search of food, or maybe another attempt at washing your face, when you hear it, shouting. Angry, panicked shouting. You quicken your pace and round a corner to find a scene right out of a historical drama, or maybe a fever dream. Two men are arguing in front of a crowd. One of them is red-faced, holding a half-eaten turnip. The other is pointing and yelling something about theft. The accused swears he grew the turnip himself. The accuser says it came from his patch. The crowd murmurs. The village reeve, something like a sheriff, but with more scowling, arrives. Justice is about to be served. You expect a calm investigation. Instead, the reeve declares that the accused must undergo a trial by ordeal. Specifically, the hot water test. You blink. Surely that's symbolic? Nope. They bring out a cauldron, fill it with water, and start a fire beneath it. You watch as the water begins to bubble. The accused looks calm, resigned even. Maybe this is normal? For him, yes. For you, not so much. Here's how it works. A stone is dropped into the cauldron. The accused must reach in, grab it, and then wait for a priest to inspect the burn after 3 days. If the wound is clean, he's innocent. If infected, guilty. You try to protest, but your voice gets lost in the crowd. Someone hands you a meat pie. This is apparently also a spectator event. Historians still argue whether trials by ordeal were genuinely believed to invoke divine judgment, or were just ritualized ways to shame people into submission. Either way, they were real and widespread. The man plunges his hand into the boiling water. He retrieves the stone, jaw clenched, face blank. The crowd is silent. Someone starts clapping. You feel like throwing up. Later, you learn there are other methods too. Trial by combat. 2 parties fight, and the winner is assumed to be righteous. Trial by fire, walking over hot coals. And trial by ingestion, where you eat dry bread and try not to choke. You wonder if that's how your breakfast is going to go. Sometimes guilt was determined by your ability to sink or float in water. Ironically, floating could mean guilt, because water, being pure, would reject the unclean. You think back to your bathhouse experience. Floating wasn't your strong suit. Noted. Punishments for the guilty varied. Fines, public shaming, stockades, mutilation. Execution, in extreme cases. Today, though, it's all about the hand burn. You shudder. Back in the square, the priest arrives, blesses the wound, and gives the man a tight nod. Come back in 3 days, he says. You wonder what happens if he dies of infection before then. Technically still guilty? You wander away, still clutching the meat pie. It tastes of onion and existential dread. Near the pillory, a wooden frame with holes for heads and hands, you see yesterday's drunkard sleeping it off. A child pokes him with a stick. A passing woman mutters about God's justice. You just walk on. Historians still debate whether these punishments were consistent or wildly arbitrary. Spoiler, it was mostly the latter. Justice in medieval villages was deeply local, and proof could mean anything from testimony to livestock gossip. You try to imagine being tried this way in the modern world. Reach into boiling water to prove you didn't steal someone's password? No thanks. You stop at a small fountain and splash some water on your face. It's cold and bracing. The village cat wanders by and gives you a look. You think it's judgment. You might deserve it. As you head back toward the house, someone offers you a sip of something herbal to keep the devil out. You drink it. It tastes like firewood and licorice. You pretend it helped. Your stomach grumbles again, reminding you that in medieval times, there's no comfort food. Only food that reminds you how far you are from comfort. But you survived your first public justice spectacle. You didn't get accused of witchcraft. And, for once, no one tried to boil your hands. That's what passes for a win these days. You try to shake off the image of a man's red, blistered hand being held up like a sacred turnip and refocus on your next mission. Blending in. Surely, if you keep your head down and mind your manners, you'll avoid any more local drama. Then you hear the bells. Deep, resonant, and oddly ominous, the church bells ring out across the village. People around you stop what they're doing mid-step. Conversations trail off. Even a goat seems to pause mid-chew. It's Sunday. You're swept along by the tide of townsfolk heading toward the stone church at the end of the square, a solid, brooding structure that seems to glare at you as you approach. Moss clings to the mortar, gargoyles sneer from the eaves, and the doors creak open with theatrical groans. You walk in, and the temperature immediately drops 10 degrees. Inside, the air smells of beeswax, mildew, and old wood. Candles flicker in wall sconces, casting long shadows that seem to judge you from every corner. You shuffle into a pew, trying not to squeak, creak, or breathe too loudly. The priest enters from a side door, swathed in heavy robes that look less spiritual and more like he's wearing someone's carpet. He climbs the pulpit steps with the grim determination of a man who has yelled at a lot of sinners and expects to yell at more today. The sermon begins. In Latin. You understand none of it, but you nod along with everyone else, furrowing your brow occasionally to suggest deep reflection. The people around you murmur amen and cross themselves. You copy them about 2 seconds too late, making it obvious you're a tourist in God's house. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant truly absorbed church teachings or simply memorized the motions. Considering you just mimicked a man crossing himself with his left hand, you suspect it was more of a cultural performance than a theological deep dive. The priest starts shouting. You're not sure what he's saying, but it sounds dramatic. He slams a book, points toward the ceiling, talks about fire. The crowd gasps. You gasp too, just to be polite. From what you can gather, sin is everywhere. Temptation is at the door. The devil is lurking in barley fields and butter churns. You suspect he's also in the outhouse behind your sleeping quarters, based on the sounds it makes. The priest references the apocalypse. You catch the word purgatorium, purgatory. Great. Not even death is relaxing. A woman beside you starts to weep. A man clenches his fist. Someone yells, "Hallelujah," with the fervor of a person who once fought a demon in a grain cellar. You sit very still. Then comes the confession line. People queue up to whisper their sins to the priest in a corner box that looks suspiciously like a coat closet. You don't join them. You'd need hours. You notice a wooden board hanging near the door. It lists names. The damned, you wonder? No, turns out it's the rota for this week's tithe collections. 10% of everything. Even if you barely have anything. Tithing was mandatory. Refuse to give? You'd be labeled a sinner. Can't afford it? Sinner. Forgot to show up? Triple sinner. God apparently had great accounting skills. Outside, the sun has risen fully and the mood has shifted. Families gather in the churchyard to gossip in hushed tones about neighbors, sermons, and whose goose laid a demon egg last week. That one's still under investigation. You get pulled into a conversation with a group of men discussing signs of the end times. One swears he saw a lamb born with 2 heads. Another claims a comet appeared last night. You mention that sometimes stars just fall from the sky. They gasp. You are now a wizard. Historians still debate how superstitious the average medieval villager truly was. But between crop failures, plagues, and random goat explosions, people clung to omens like life preservers in a sea of chaos. A boy tells you that sneezing means your soul is trying to escape. You sneeze. He screams and runs away. By midday, the sermon is over. You're emotionally drained and haven't sinned once today. That's progress. You walk past a shrine on the edge of town where villagers leave offerings: bread, coins, beads, a chicken feather. You add a pebble. It feels appropriate. On your way back to your room, a generous word for your straw mattress and foot-sniffing dog. You overhear a man preaching on the corner. He's not a priest, just a guy who thinks the river is angry. You nod solemnly. It does look a bit angry today. The line between religion, superstition, and just plain weirdness is very thin here. Spirits are real. Saints walk among us. And if you burn your porridge, it's probably because your grandmother didn't light the right candle. But you made it through your first medieval Sunday without being accused of heresy. You only joined the wrong prayer once, and you've learned that sometimes the loudest voices wear the heaviest robes. Also, don't sneeze in public. Ever. You think you're starting to get the hang of things, waking up with livestock, surviving on bread that doubles as a projectile, dodging theological debates, but then it happens. Someone sneezes. It's not a delicate little achoo. It's a wet, rattling, soul-rattling explosion of mucus and misery that echoes down the alley like a warning shot. Heads turn. Conversations halt. A dog howls. You glance at the source. A man is hunched on a stool, pale as candle wax, nose dripping, eyes glassy. He coughs. Once. Twice. Then again, this time with a small splatter of something, red. You take a step back. So does everyone else. This is not a cold. This is not allergies. This is something else. Within minutes, word spreads. Sickness, someone says. The pestilence, whispers another. A third just says, it's back, and runs. You've officially entered the part of medieval life you were hoping to avoid, the plague. Historians still argue whether this fear was constant or cyclical. But in any given year, there was a good chance someone in a village was coughing up blood and being avoided like spoiled eel pie. You follow the movement of the crowd. People are shutting their doors. Windows are slammed. Market stalls vanish in seconds. A man throws a clove of garlic at the sick person and yells, "Begone, foul air." You're not sure if he's curing illness or warding off vampires. A woman shouts something about miasma. The belief that disease comes from bad air. To protect herself, she ties a bundle of herbs under her nose and lights a small fire of rosemary nearby. You follow suit, mostly because it smells better than you do. The sick man is carried away by two neighbors wearing what looks like waxed cloth wrapped around their faces. They drag him toward a small hut at the edge of town. You don't ask what happens next. You already know. You pass a sign crudely scratched onto a board. God have mercy. It hangs on a door. You don't want to know what's behind it. Historians still debate how effective medieval quarantine efforts were. There were attempts. Some towns walled off infected districts. Ships were held in port for 40 days, hence quarantine. But more often than not, fear moved faster than facts, and facts were hard to come by. No germ theory, no microscopes, just superstition, desperate prayers and trial and error treatments that mostly involved bleeding, leeches or mustard plasters, sometimes all three. A man stands on a barrel and starts preaching about sin. "This is punishment," he cries. "The Lord smites the lustful." A baker shouts back, "Then why are the monks sick too?" That earns him a rock thrown in his general direction. You duck into a small alley to catch your breath. You're not sick. Not yet. But every tickle in your throat feels like doom. Nearby, a physician passes by, dressed in a long black cloak with gloves and a wide-brimmed hat. His face is hidden behind a long bird-like beak filled with herbs. The infamous plague doctor. He looks terrifying. He also has absolutely no idea what he's doing. You try to speak to him, but he doesn't answer. Just walks on, muttering something that sounds vaguely Latin and vaguely defeated. Back in the square, People are burning straw bundles and waving incense. Someone kills a dog, claiming it spreads the illness. Another person buries a stash of onions for protective reasons. You don't question it. You're too busy wondering if you should flee the village entirely. But where would you go? The next town? The next plague-ridden town? You spot a young girl crouched beside her mother, who's lying on the ground, unmoving. The girl doesn't cry. She just strokes her mother's hair with the sort of calm that comes from having seen too much. You walk past her quietly, feeling heavy. You find yourself near the cemetery. A man digs a trench. It's wide, deep, too fresh. He pauses, wipes his brow and says, "This week's just getting started." You sit on a nearby rock, not too close. He asks where you're from. You hesitate. "Far away," you say. He nods. "Aren't we all, these days?" In the distance, the church bells toll again, this time not for prayer but for the dead. You think back to modern vaccines, hospitals, soap. A world where sneezing doesn't clear a room. Here, a cough could be a death sentence. And no one knows why. Just that it happens, and keeps happening. You get up. Walk slowly back toward the village. Smoke curls from small fires, meant to purify the air. People wear charms, chant prayers and stuff their ears with herbs. No one knows what works. So they try everything. One man shouts that a comet appeared the night before. Another claims it was a cat. Either way, something's being blamed. You return to your corner of the straw mattress and lie down fully clothed, not trusting anything around you. You wrap your face in a cloth, not sure if it helps. It probably doesn't. But it feels like trying. And trying is all anyone here can do. You wake to the sound of metal on metal, harsh, rhythmic, relentless. For a moment, you think it's the church bells again. Then you realize it's work. Real, back-breaking, day-long medieval labor. You roll off your straw mattress with the grace of a sack of flour, joints popping like overcooked stew. The air is cold and thick with smoke from 100 chimneys. Outside, the village is already alive with movement, carts creaking, animals groaning, people shouting, tools clanging. There is no 9 to 5 here. There's sun to collapse. You ask how to help, hoping for something easy. Maybe light weaving? Some gentle goat herding. Instead, you're handed a hoe and pointed toward the fields. You trudge along a dirt path past rows of low stone walls, toward a patch of soil that looks less like farmland and more like an aggressive gravel pit. The sun hasn't even cleared the hills yet, and already your breath fogs in the chill morning air. Welcome to a medieval day's work. You probably won't survive this either. The soil is hard, your tool is blunt, and your arms are made of sadness. You start digging, awkwardly, at first, then with rising despair. It takes 15 minutes just to uproot something that turns out to be a rock pretending to be a potato. A woman nearby is working twice as fast, using a wooden spade that looks older than the village itself. She grins at your struggle, then says, "Don't worry, we all cry our first day." You don't have the breath to respond. Historians still argue just how brutal medieval peasant labor really was. Some say it wasn't as bad as we imagine. Fields were left fallow, holidays were frequent, and tasks were shared. Others point out the average peasant's body showed signs of chronic strain, arthritis, and malnutrition. Judging by your cramping back and blistered hands, you're siding with Team Brutal. By mid-morning, you're drenched in sweat despite the cold, and your hands feel like they've been personally insulted by every stone in the field. A child brings you a cup of water. It's lukewarm, probably shared by 5 other people, and tastes faintly of goat. You drink it like nectar from the gods, then it's back to work. You try your hand at threshing grain. This involves swinging a heavy flail at bundles of wheat to separate the grain from the stalk. Sounds easy, isn't? After 3 swings, your shoulder threatens to quit the job entirely. Then comes winnowing. You toss the grain into the air so the wind can blow away the chaff. Unfortunately, there's no wind today, just your own weak huffing. The chaff sticks to your tunic, your hair, your eyelids. You sneeze 5 times. A boy nearby looks at you suspiciously. Still just dust, you mutter. Lunch is announced with the ringing of a bell made from what appears to be a repurposed frying pan. You collapse onto the grass and are handed a small cloth bundle. Inside, bread, onions, and a piece of cheese that smells like it lost a fight with a moldy sock. You eat every bite. The afternoon brings even more chores. You're given a scythe to cut hay, but it's so dull it mostly massages the grass. Your arms throb. Your legs ache. At one point you sit down and seriously consider becoming a rock. They seem to have it easier. You look around and realize that everyone else is just doing it. Young, old, bent, barefoot. They're laughing, shouting, gossiping while hauling sacks twice their weight. A woman sings while stomping mud to make bricks. A man whistles while splitting firewood. You make a noise too. It sounds like despair and grunting. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants found joy in their labor or simply endured it. The truth seems to lie somewhere in between. When everyone is tired, no one feels alone. You're roped into helping stack firewood behind a cottage. Each log is a new personal enemy. A pig watches you from behind a fence with open amusement. Someone gives you a turn at hauling manure. You ask what it's for. Everything, they say. Fields, compost, walls. You stop asking questions. As the sun lowers, the air begins to cool again. You return to the field, where a few stragglers are finishing their rows. You join in, stabbing your hoe into the earth like a warrior who's lost the will to fight, but is still contractually obligated to keep swinging. Finally, a horn sounds. Work is done. People begin to scatter, some toward the tavern, some toward home, some toward a communal wash basin that you really hope isn't also the soup pot. You drag yourself back toward your straw mattress. Every muscle is sore. Your hands are blistered. You smell like damp wool, spoiled cheese, and humility. And yet, something else creeps in. A weird, blurry sense of pride. You made it through a full medieval workday without collapsing into the barley or being fired by a pig. That's something. You settle into bed. The straw feels slightly less hostile than it did yesterday. The dog curls up beside you. You groan softly. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because in the Middle Ages, survival is the job. Morning arrives like a slap made of ice. There are no curtains to block the cold light creeping through the cracks in the wooden walls, no insulation to hold in warmth, just the slow realization that your toes are frozen and the dog beside you has taken your blanket. Again, welcome to medieval winter. You sit up, every joint creaking like a church pew. Your breath hangs in front of your face. You half expect your own nose to snap off like a carrot. The straw mattress beneath you is damp. Again, you're not sure if it's condensation, animal activity, or just the general dampness of medieval everything. Probably all three. You shuffle to the door and open it to a landscape dusted in white. Frost clings to the rooftops. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling slowly through the still, frozen air. A pig trots past, wearing what looks like a child's old tunic. Everyone's cold, human, animal, spirit. Inside your tunic, which has not dried properly in days, your body begins to shake. Layering is your only defense. You put on 2 more garments, a burlap undershirt, and something that might have once been a curtain. You're now dressed like a damp onion. Outside, work begins as usual, only slower. Tools are frozen. Water barrels have cracked. Someone is hacking at the frozen earth with the same determination most people reserve for bank robberies. You're handed a task, breaking ice off the village well. With a stick. That's your morning. You go at it with numb fingers and hope no one notices you weeping quietly into your scarf. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were deadlier because of cold or because of starvation. Either way, it was a grim season. Crops don't grow, food spoils, animals huddle and die. You eat less, move less, and pray more, especially if you live in a poorly built hut with 24 cracks and zero insulation. You visit a cottage where the family has sealed the windows with rags and straw. Inside, 6 people and a goat share a single bed. Warmest way, they say. You're starting to believe it. A woman stirs a pot of thin turnip broth. She hands you a bowl. It's more steam than substance, but it's hot and vaguely flavored. You cherish it like treasure. Even basic hygiene becomes more complicated in winter. You want to wash your hands, but the water is a block of ice. You want to change clothes, but nothing dry exists. You want to breathe, but your nose has frozen shut. You watch as a group of villagers herd animals indoors. Yes, indoors. Sheep, pigs, even a goose or two. This isn't a barn. It's their home. The animals provide warmth, and fleas, and smells you can't even describe politely. You retreat to your room, which is still just a mat of straw with aspirations, and try to warm up. You wrap your legs in extra cloth, wrap your hands in someone's sock, and sit near the fireplace, which is more smoke than fire. A neighbor comes by offering a hot brick. You accept it gratefully, pressing it to your chest like a sacred relic. It loses heat in 5 minutes, but it's the best 5 minutes you've had all day. You ask how people survive the cold. The answer? Layers, lard, and luck. Lard, in fact, is multi-purpose. It's rubbed on cheeks to prevent frostbite, on lips for cracking, on leather to make it supple, on bread because, well, sometimes you just have to eat your skincare. You try a spoonful. It's not great, but it's fat. And fat equals calories. And calories equal life. Historians still debate how medieval people coped with cold without central heating. The answer is surprisingly creative. Heavy curtains over beds, hot stones in cloth, sleeping caps, even communal huddling. Fireplaces helped, but only barely. Later that day, someone suggests a walk to stay warm. You laugh. Then you realize they're serious. You trudge behind a group of villagers through snow-crusted fields, your breath steaming in bursts, your boots squelching with slush and shame. A man tells you that the frost is a punishment from St. Cuthbert for some unspecified communal sin. You nod solemnly. In this weather, any explanation will do. You pass a frozen pond. A child skates across it on pieces of bone tied to their feet with string. It's reckless. It's dangerous. It's the happiest anyone's looked all week. Back in town, a group gathers for warmth in the tavern. The fire crackles weakly. Ale is sipped. Hands are extended toward the flame with exaggerated reverence. For once, no one fights. It's too cold for brawling. You sit on a bench near the fire, your clothes steaming slightly. Someone hands you a roasted chestnut. It burns your tongue, but you eat it anyway. That night, you sleep in all your clothes, curled around a brick that once lived in a chimney. The wind howls outside like a banshee with sinus issues. The dog shares your blanket. The pig snores. You're still cold, but you're not dead. And in medieval winter, that's a win. You've survived the cold, the plague, the bread, and the bucket baths. But today, you face something different, something more complex, more confusing. Love. Or, well, whatever medieval people had instead of it. It starts innocently enough. You're walking through the village, chewing a questionable piece of dried fruit, and trying not to think about the rat that gave it to you. Then a young woman walks past and drops her kerchief deliberately. You freeze. Is this a trap? A signal? A medieval flirt? You pick up the kerchief. She smiles. Then her father appears out of nowhere and glares at you like you just proposed marriage using livestock. Apparently you did. Historians still argue how much freedom medieval people had when choosing partners. In some places and periods, young people were surprisingly autonomous. In others, a sideways glance and shared bread roll could have legal implications, especially if dowries were involved. You're suddenly whisked into a conversation you did not consent to. The girl's family wants to know your occupation, your landholding, your lineage. You answer, time traveler? They nod, impressed. Probably think it's a Welsh surname. They ask what your intentions are. You say, to not freeze or die. This seems acceptable. The conversation moves quickly. Talk of betrothal. A modest wedding. Maybe a chicken as part of the deal. You haven't even held the girl's hand yet. She's now referred to as your intended. You feel like a pawn in a very itchy chess game. You back away slowly, claiming you have to go churn something. They accept this. Later, you learn more about the medieval dance of courtship. Dowries aren't just for nobles. Even peasants exchanged livestock, tools or land rights when marrying off a daughter. Love was a bonus. Property was the real prize. One man boasts that his daughter came with a cow and 2 spinning wheels. Another says his wife was a steal at just a pig and a sack of oats. You try to stay neutral. The next day, you're invited to a wedding. You go out of curiosity, and for the food. It takes place in a field. There's music, clapping, a man juggling turnips. The bride is 14. The groom is 40. You try not to think too hard about it. Historians still debate the average age of marriage in the Middle Ages. Among peasants, it often occurred later than you'd expect, late teens or 20s, because households couldn't afford to support married children until they could contribute labor. Still, betrothals could happen at disturbingly young ages. At the wedding, there's a feast. Bread, ale, stewed vegetables. Something that might be pigeon. Someone performs a lewd dance involving a goose. You politely pretend to enjoy it. After the feast, the couple is led to their new bed. The guests follow. Yes, follow. Because in some regions and times, communal witnessing of the bedding was expected. Not the act itself, just the getting into bed. Still awkward. You sneak away before you're asked to hold a candle. Back in the village, gossip about you is spreading. Someone saw you talking to the tanner's niece. Someone else says you smiled at the brewer's daughter. There's talk of arranging a match, or 2, or 3. You consider faking your own death. You try asking someone if people marry for love. A woman scrubbing laundry says, "Love is what you build after you survive a winter together." Fair enough. Later you pass a couple sitting quietly beneath a tree. He's weaving a garland from weeds. She's pretending not to smile. They don't speak. They just sit. It's the most romantic thing you've seen all week. That night, a drunken man in the tavern recites a love poem to his wife. It rhymes blisters with sisters and ends with a burp. She pats his hand anyway. Marriage, you realize, isn't just about the ceremony. It's economics, survival, alliance. But within it, somehow, there's room for affection, for laughter, for stolen moments of warmth between chores and childbirths and plagues. You fall asleep that night thinking of the girl with the kerchief. You never even got her name. Just a look, a gesture, a brief moment where something might have been possible if your hands weren't covered in turnip mud and smallpox rumors. But love, like everything else here, survives despite it all. You've seen things, smelled things. You've survived chores, rats, soup, public bathing, blistering labor, and a kind of bread that could shatter glass. So now, at the end of your medieval journey, you're desperate for one thing: sleep. Just peaceful, uninterrupted, nobody yelling about turnip sleep. It's evening again. The sky is soft purple, streaked with ash-gray clouds. Smoke curls from chimneys. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, probably yours. Chickens settle into their coops. Someone is yelling about geese, but you've learned to ignore that now. You've adapted. You trudge back to your borrowed cottage with your tunic stuck to your back and a strange waxy herb in your pocket that someone swore keeps nightmares away. It doesn't. Inside, the room is quiet, save for the occasional creak of old beams and the quiet scuffle of mice in the thatch above. The straw mattress looks familiar now. Not good, but familiar. Your blanket is still shared with a piglet and a toddler. You don't question it anymore. You just climb in, grateful. But just as your eyes begin to close, shouting. Again, you groan and sit up. Outside, there's a commotion. A man is thrashing in the street, shouting about demons. His neighbors try to calm him down. Someone throws water on him. A woman throws bread. Neither seems to help. You recognize the symptoms: sleep terrors, or possibly poisoning, or a bad oyster. Medieval diagnosis is imprecise. The crowd disperses. The man is dragged inside. A priest mutters a quick prayer. You lie back down, heart pounding. Just as you're drifting off again, skitter, skitter, skitter. Rats. They stage their nightly parade across the rafters. You cover your head with your blanket and whisper, "This is fine." They scratch. You try to scratch back mentally. Historians still debate how tolerable the average peasant's sleeping conditions truly were. While beds and mattresses existed, many slept on hay piles, benches, or just the floor. Privacy was rare. Night terrors were common. And night-watching cats were not pets, they were co-workers. You shift onto your side. Your hip hits a rock. You shift again. Your face ends up in something damp. You give up and accept that comfort is a 20th century invention. As you start to slip into sleep for the third time, a child across the room sits up and whispers, "The moon is watching." You open one eye, sigh, and mutter, "Good. Let it." Eventually, miraculously, you begin to drift. The sounds blur, distant hooves, snoring, the pop of a dying fire. Your breath slows. The weight of the day sinks into the mattress. Your final thoughts before sleep claim you? That you're thankful for socks. That you now respect bread as both weapon and food. And that maybe, just maybe, you understand how people managed to live like this for centuries. And now, let's wind down. You're still in that small, flickering room, curled into the warmth of a straw bed that, strangely, no longer feels foreign. Outside, the wind whispers softly along the eaves, rustling leaves and forgotten scraps of cloth tied to fences for luck. The last candle guttered out a few minutes ago, leaving only shadows and the quiet crackle of cooling embers. Your muscles ache in that oddly satisfying way, like the memory of movement now gone still. The day is behind you. The frost, the fleas, the long stretch of fields, the laughter in the tavern, it all settles in your mind like dust on a windowsill. Harmless now. Gentle. Around you, soft snores rise and fall. Somewhere in the room, A dog sighs in its sleep. The baby, for once, doesn't cry. Even the rats above have quieted, their little claws now just part of the night's rhythm. You breathe in, slowly, deeply, and exhale just as slow. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and lavender someone hung in the rafters weeks ago. The pillow under your head is rough, but you're used to it now. It holds you. Let your eyes close. Let your thoughts drift with the candle smoke into the beams above. You've survived a day in the Middle Ages, not polished or poetic, but real. Lived, felt, endured, and here you are, safe, warm, quiet. Breathe again, slower this time. The day is over, and so is this journey. Sweet dreams.